Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Roel and Francois.
Today's show is brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/clear2send and browse the fantastic selection of audio programs. Download a title free and start listening. It's that easy. Again, go to audibletrial.com/clear2send.
Hi guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. Happy New Year. This is the first episode of the year and I'm here with Roel. Hey Roel, how are you?
Hey, good morning. Good morning everyone. Happy New Year. I'm here at Los Angeles actually because at the beginning of the year decided to meet some of my family members because we didn't see them over Christmas, and I had one meeting out here. So I'm in the lobby of the Intercontinental Hotel on the 70th floor. If you can hear that background music, that's because of me.
And yeah, that sounds good. It's okay. We'll have this lounge ambience once again. Feels good. And on my side, I'm actually not in my office because I'm doing some office renovation. So I also have my remote set up in my dining room. So that that's nice. I wanted to start a new office, so I'm working on that right now.
Very nice. That's cool. That's gonna be exciting for you with renovating your office. It's like new year, new you.
Exactly. Even though I'm not really good at it, but trying my best, Yeah,
I think it'll look good.
Yeah, we'll see. You guys will tell me. I'll share some pictures. Anyway, so this week we wanted to talk about how you could build your wireless lab, right? How you could build your lab at home to practice and learn a little bit more about Wi-Fi. So if you just started with Wi-Fi, or if you've had interest in Wi-Fi for a while and never took the time to set up a lab or did some digging, learning, searching, and so on, testing, this episode will help you out to figure out what you need to do, what type of equipment you need, how much it's going to cost you, and things like that.
Yeah, this is a good topic, and it came up as one of a topic that somebody recommended from our survey. So if you want to add in some topics, you can do so from our website. Go to clear2send.net, and then there's an ask a question there. And also, if you do have 1 to 2 minutes, please fill out our listener audience survey that lets us know how we're doing and how we could improve. You can go to clear2send.net/2019-survey.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone who already provided feedbacks. It's really valuable information for us. And we, like Roel said, we actually got the idea for this episode from you guys.
Awesome.
So if you want us to talk about something else, just make sure you let us know, and so we can actually pick it up and then talk about it on the podcast.
Cool. So the lab portion of wireless, and as anyone who's in IT, there's always going to be this idea of having a lab, whether that's in your workplace, you have a lab of equipment that you could play with, test out configurations, and learn how to use the technology without playing with it on production. And I know a lot of people also have this at home, like if you're like me or Francois, we have lab equipment at home. And then there are going to be some people who actually use production as their lab, which is not very highly recommended, but it's also something that you probably can't avoid, right? Because you don't have the budget to replicate production or have the budget to buy extra equipment. So we wanted to talk about the equipment that we have specifically in our lab, and this is going to be mainly the home lab that we both have, right?
Yes, and the lab I have at home, I also use it for my business. Since I work as an independent consultant, and I often need to test some things for customers, or I need to work on a specific project in my lab in order to replicate, in a customer environment. So I actually also use my lab not only for personal learning purposes, but also for my business, which makes it easier for me, I guess, to finance it and everything. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the purposes for having a lab, right? So, I mean, you actually highlighted a couple of them. One, so you could learn some of this equipment for your workplace. And so whether that's maybe you're studying for a certification, a wireless certification, and you need to learn how the equipment works. That's one purpose. Or maybe you're doing something for a client and you need to really understand how the technology works in order to make this project successful. That's another way. Or you want to be confident in what you do with wireless, especially if you're an independent consultant like Francois. You really need to display that you understand what you're doing. And when clients ask you questions, you want to be able to answer those confidently and to show that you really do know how to use the equipment that they plan on using. And then there's other reasons why maybe you need to document something, or what else, Francois? Could experimenting to break things and really see how wireless works, for example. That's one way. Or testing out a new feature, like when Wi-Fi 6 came out, you want to test that out and make sure it works as you've read in the draft. Or when WPA3, how does that work? How is it any different from WPA2? Like there's a lot of reasons why you would have a lab.
Yeah, so I think ultimately the goal of having a lab, or the purpose of having a lab, is to make you a better engineer, right? Make you a better engineer technically, in the meaning that you're going to learn, you're going to test, you're going to break things, you're going to find solutions. So it's going to improve your technical skills. But also, what you should do when you have a lab is try to document everything you do, so it can also improve your writing skills, maybe your soft skills, and ultimately make you a better engineer. It's also a perfect opportunity to maybe start a blog, right? And then talk about what you do in your lab. And it's an easy way to know what to talk about when you have a blog, or start a blog, and then develop that side of being an engineer as well, right? So I think that's ultimately the goal, is just to become a better engineer.
Yeah, that's a good point, because with documentation, it's something that's always lacking in many environments. And I just had a meeting the other day where I asked for some documentation, especially when it came to the cabling for wireless, and they couldn't come up with anything, and they just said there is no documentation at all. And so I think as engineers, when we're configuring things, when we're deploying hardware, I think it's important to learn how to document, and starting a blog is one way to start doing that documentation. And you can even be one step further if you document to your lab, like Francois does, right? Francois, you got like a full document on how your lab looks and how it's configured.
Yeah. So that we'll talk about the process of configuring it a little bit in the episode. But yeah, that's what I did. So before touching any hardware equipment, I pretty much worked on the on the architecture. It's very simple since it's a lab, right? But I took the time to do exactly what we do in a production environment. Work on the how I wanted to set up layer 3, layer 2 with subnets and all of this. And I created my diagram, and then after that I implemented it in my lab to have like a base, kind of a baseline. After that, obviously, you'll break things and change things and add stuff, and this will change a little bit. But I always try to have, a baseline of what my lab should look like.
Okay, so once you maybe start outlining some of that, maybe let's talk about the equipment you actually need to get started for a lab.
Yeah, exactly. And specifically, sorry, it's early in the morning. Specifically, if you want to study Wi-Fi, right? So we try to prepare this episode having Wi-Fi in mind. If you want to study Wi-Fi and then test Wi-Fi features, we kept that in mind to prepare this episode. So keep that in mind as well. So which equipment do you need? I think it will depend on what you usually work with, right? Do you work for a VAR that resells Cisco? So in this case, you might want to have Cisco equipment in your lab, right? Or do you just work for a hospital and all you have is Aruba? So maybe you want to have Aruba in your lab, right? So it's going to depend on what you do and what type of job you do. Or do you work as an independent consultant like we do? Then you need to have a little bit of everything, or you need to have the equipment that your main customer have, so you can do some tests and so on. So yeah,
I think that's a good place to start. Is if you're working at a workplace, the best place to start is with whatever equipment your employer uses. Now, if you don't have a job and you're studying Wi-Fi right now, or maybe you're just getting started in Wi-Fi, then the best place I think to start is whatever you have at home, because that's going to be the same. It might not be enterprise Wi-Fi, but it's still Wi-Fi, right? So you can start somewhere, and you can start with home Wi-Fi, or maybe at your local Starbucks and study the Wi-Fi there. That's one place to get started, because it doesn't take much to get started with Wi-Fi. It's everywhere, and it's one way for you to study how Wi-Fi works in that environment.
Yeah, exactly. And we actually had a punchline for this, and we said, you can start labbing for $0. Right?
Yeah.
Because like you said, you can, if you just want to learn about a little bit about Wi-Fi, you actually don't need a specific lab just for that. You can use your home Wi-Fi network to study Wi-Fi, right? You just need to set up a Wi-Fi network, which you probably already have at home. You probably have some clients at home, right? So you can use that to start doing some packet captures. You can do packet captures for free if you have a Mac using AirTool. If you have Windows, you can also find free tools to do packet captures, and then you can analyze it using Wireshark. It's free. And then if you want to go a step further, you can download the standards. You just have to create an account on the IEEE website, but it's free, and you can start learning a whole bunch about Wi-Fi for free.
Yeah, it's going to operate very much like an enterprise network. The only difference is the configuration is not scaling towards like an enterprise network, but nonetheless, you're still, if you're going to create an SSID, you're still creating an SSID. It just looks different with your consumer based access point, but it's going to operate the same. So you could still read the standards and follow it to see what exactly is happening, and be able to see that in the frame captures, because that's exactly how it's going to be described, right? I think it's the best way to get started, and that's how I got started with learning Wi-Fi, is just using what I had at home and what I saw at the workplace. And then I just wanted to see the consistency from the standard and how other vendors implemented it.
Yeah, so that's a great way to get started. And then after that, if you want to evolve, or if you want to make your lab a little bit better, if you want to add equipment, then you can start to work on your own lab little by little. That's actually what happened to both you and I, where we started with very simple things, and then over time we added equipment as we could in order to evolve our lab and add some more pieces to it.
Yeah, and I think another good tip for getting started for $0, and you could attend one of these webinars by Meraki or Mist, and they will actually ship you a new an AP as long as you meet some of the requirements. I'm not sure what those requirements are. I think you need a work email and an address. Obviously, it's a sales thing for them. But if you qualify, you at least get a free AP from an enterprise, basically an enterprise type of access point. So it's something you could try to go after, and it should probably work out for you in order to do some of the testing that you want to do.
So here's we came up with a quick list of useful pieces of equipment you could have in your lab if you want to have a solid lab and things you can rely on to test some features. First, a router. Right, router is nice because it allows you to define your subnets. Maybe you can have a firewall on this router, and you can do, or you can have a gateway, a layer 3 gateway, and you can also do your firewalling, VPN, and so on. Then a switch. If you have a switch, it's better if you want to do Wi-Fi and test different type of APs. It's better to have a PoE plus switch, so you can actually power those APs using your switch. And it's also better if you have gig ports, because most of the enterprise access point nowadays, they're taking gig as a uplink, so you can actually test the full gig speed throughout your lab if you want to do some speed test and so on. Then you could have access points, right? So depending on what you work on, the vendor you like, or the vendor of your workplace, or different AP from different vendors, you could have controllers. Rather, if it's it could be an appliance or it could be virtual, and then you could have a small server to host some VMs if you need a radio server, if you need Ubuntu, if you need ICE or whatever network access control solution you work with. And maybe you want a WLAN Pi if you want to, use it as different purposes, or Linux server somewhere to be able to use some Linux tools.
Yeah, and I think those are the core components here of getting your lab equipment together. Obviously, the switch is an important one, because in the field, you're going to be plugging in an AP into the switch, and you want to understand PoE requirements and how PoE works. So it'd be nice to have that. And I know some switches are going to be pretty costly to have in order to get those PoE plus ports. But you can probably find something on eBay, or you don't have to use PoE Plus to get started, but it's just kind of a nice to have, because that's where all the APs are going towards anyways. And any access point from any vendor will work just to get started in a lab. It doesn't have to be really expensive access points. You can find some more affordable access points that still have some of those enterprise-like features that you get from other vendors.
Yeah, if you don't have PoE Plus switch, you could use power injector, but I found that power injectors are quite expensive as well. Yeah. I actually use. I found a very small switch on Amazon, and it was like $50, and it gave me PoE Plus. Yeah. So maybe we'll put a link in the description for that one as well. And I that's the one I take on the go if I need to do something on the go and power an AP. I just take this with me because it's cheaper than a power injector, and it does the job to power the AP. Yeah,
there are some pretty low cost switches like from Netgear, and I think Microtik makes one that's PoE as well. So it's easy to get started with those types of switches. They're going to be low in port count, but at least it gets you there for getting started with one AP, and then when you get multiple APs, you can try to connect those all together to try to build a lab where you could analyze roaming, for example. So that's one way to get started. And then when it comes to controllers, and I know those are pretty cost prohibitive for a lot of people, but sometimes you can get your employer to help fund some of those controllers in order for you to get started in learning how to use something like a Cisco or an Aruba controller. And I think that's once you get to that point, then your lab actually starts getting more complicated. But now you're building out something where you could test out controller-based APs and also autonomous like APs.
Yeah, and I think it's a good time to talk about some tips you could use in order to get affordable equipment.
Yeah.
Right? So the first tip I like to give is, ask colleagues, friends, peers if you can borrow some equipment, right? Some people will have some equipment laying down around, never used, that you could actually leverage. If you're just learning something, you could leverage those equipment and you can borrow it, and for some time, and then try it in your lab.
Yeah, and I think I just saw somebody posting something on Twitter. It wasn't wireless equipment, but they were posting a lab equipment that they weren't using anymore. And I think maybe if you posted something on Twitter saying, "Hey, I wanted to study wireless, but I don't have all the lab equipment I need," you might be able to ask someone if they have equipment that's just sitting in their garage, and if they don't want it, they could let you borrow it or hand it to you so you could test it out yourself. I think that's worth a shot.
Yeah, and WLAN, wireless LAN professionals with Keith Parsons, they used to have a landing library. I'm not sure if it's still available today, but what would happen is on his website he will have a list of equipment, and then you will just request the one you want to try out and pay shipping, and then they'll ship it to you for given amount of time, so you could actually borrow it. I'm not sure if it's still the case. And
yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's still there, but I know at WLPC they do the equipment swap, or yeah. I don't know what they call it, equipment swap. And then sometimes if you take a boot camp that also comes with equipment, you might be able to get equipment that way.
So that's the first tip on how to get affordable equipment. Second one is you can look on the reselling platforms like eBay and such, and sometimes you can find pretty good deal. For instance, you can find a Cisco AirNet AC AP for less than $100. So that can be a good way as well to get some refurbished equipment that still works but are pretty affordable for your lab.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of those on the marketplace because my employer, we got rid of a lot of 3502s, and I thought the 3502 was a great AP for any kind of lab work, and I believe those go for about $25 on eBay, and as long as you can get the autonomous AP image, or if you have a controller, you can get that working pretty easily.
Yeah. Another option is you can try to see if you can use your company to lend you some equipment, lab equipment, or you can try to see with VARs if you can leverage some non-for-resale programs if you work for a VAR, and try to see if you can get equipment at a cheaper price.
Yeah, and I think that's very common for a lot of VARs because they do have the not for resale, which is the NFR program. They do have a certain number or a certain budget they have available to spend on this equipment, and it's not the full retail price. And it's exactly for this purpose, which is testing out some services on hardware or testing out the hardware itself. That's exactly what this program is for.
And then finally, you can try to talk to vendors to see if you can borrow equipment, or you can attend those webinars, sales webinars, and try to get an AP for yourself. But sometimes if you just want to test a feature, you can ask the vendors if you can borrow and then send it back to them. Most of the time, they'll be willing to let you try it out, and you can try something out in your lab.
Yeah, just be very nice to them.
Yeah, exactly.
And you might have to give up some information in order to get the equipment right, because they do want to know why you want to look at the equipment. So it may turn into a potential sale for them. But sometimes if you're just honest and you want to learn something, you get in touch with the right person and they might be able to just send you something. But it just depends on the company itself. Some companies don't just give free stuff or loan free stuff, but I think that's also just worth a shot.
Yeah, you can always try. That's also when blogging becomes important as well, because if you start blogging on what you do in your lab, and then you approach a vendor and you tell them, everything I'm going to do in my lab, I'm also going to blog about it. Maybe the vendor will be more willing to borrow, lend the equipment.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about that subject because it has happened in the past. I used to publish a blog very regularly, right? And Francois, you still publish regularly. I still publish every once in a while. And there were some times where people would approach us and just let us borrow an AP just to take a look at it or write about it or even talk about it on the podcast. So it is common. It's still It's still done out there, and it's part of the marketing budget for a lot of these companies. So if you're going to take that approach, I think you should just focus on writing a blog or even some sort of platform. It could be a video-based platform, and just start talking about these features to viewers who or readers who would look at this as a way to evaluate a product, right? But it's coming from somebody's different perspective, like my perspective or Francois' perspective. We have different opinions on a product. So if you're looking at it, you could be describing something that's different or describing how a feature is done and how it's unique. So that's one way to approach it. It's not a guaranteed way of getting some loaner equipment, but it is one way to approach it.
Yeah. So all of these tips should help you to get some, enterprise equipment for a more affordable price, hopefully. I've definitely used some of them for my lab. All right, so this is for the hardware, but what's also important for your lab is the software, right? Because you are going to need the software to analyze what you're doing in your lab, right? So it's also a very important piece of your lab. So what type of software do you need in your lab? So first you need, if you have some APs controllers, you need the firmware for those APs controllers. And you can use that to learn how to upgrade an AP, learn what happens when an AP boots, what's the joining process with the controller, what happens if it's a cloud-based AP, what type of traffic is exchanged on the network, and so on. So you can use those for those purposes. Or you can learn how to convert, an AP from being a campus lightweight AP to an autonomous for an AP on a stick, for instance. So you can do all of these with the AP firmware. Then you might need some virtual machines, right? So you could have maybe a radio server. Maybe you need a NAC solution, ICE ClearPass, for instance. So you need a virtual machine so you can run that. Maybe you have some virtual controllers, right? The new Cisco Catalyst 9800 comes in a VM. Most controllers nowadays come as a virtual as well, so you can try that out as a virtual machine. Maybe you need a DHCP DNS server to replicate Windows environment, Windows Server environment. Maybe you need Active Directory and so on. So those will allow you to test these more advanced enterprise features.
Yeah, and I think an important thing to realize with some of the software is, in order to acquire some of these, you do need some sort of support or an active license in order to get the software. And I know it's a common question with a lot of people getting started in this is, where do I get the software to configure the AP in autonomous mode, right? So a lot of people will ask directly, can I have the software? And that question is always no, because we ourselves are not allowed to just give out the software. It's something that is licensed to us from the purchase or as we get support from the vendor. So it's always required to acquire that software legally. So that's going to be like the AP software, the controller software, even adding an AP to be managed by a cloud instance. And then there are free solutions like Radius software. You can use free Radius and install that as a VM in order to use it. ICE and ClearPass, you'll probably be able to get away with trial licenses if you don't have access to use a lab version, or if you don't have funds to purchase it. And then it's the same with DHCP and DNS. You could use the Linux versions, or you could use something on Windows Server as a trial, or maybe you have access to Windows licenses.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And then you're going to need some tools, right, on your laptop. Tools to do some Wi-Fi analysis. We've talked a lot about tools. I'm sure you can go back and listen to some of these episodes. And then depending on what you're using, Mac OS, Windows, you can have different set of tools. So for Mac OS, AirTool is nice. It allows you to do packet captures, and it's also a free tool. You have Wireshark, which is also a free tool, allows you to analyze those packets. You have Wi-Fi Explorer, which allows you to do some Wi-Fi scanning. That's pretty affordable. You have Wi-Fi Signal, which allows you to see in real time the status of your connection, some basic stats about your connection. Also sends you a notification when you roam or when something happens. iTerms to do some, to start some SSH sessions. You actually don't need iTerm. You can just use Terminal, but iTerm is free and a little bit more advanced, so it's nice. And then if you want to do things like spectrum analysis, you can use Ekahau, tools like that. Or if you want to try out, predictive designs and stuff like that, you can use Ekahau or Tomograph, for instance.
Yeah, and for spectrum analysis, you will need an additional piece of equipment because you need a spectrum analyzer. Our laptops are not capable of analyzing spectrum, so that's where that extra tool comes from. And all of these tools Francois and I use, we primarily use Macs, so these are the tools, our go-to when it comes to troubleshooting, analyzing, designing Wi-Fi. The Tomograph I actually don't use, but I wanted to put it in there as an alternative for Ekahau, because there are some people that may not have certain budgets for Ekahau, so Tomograph is another alternative for site surveys and analysis on the Mac platform.
Yeah, and Tamosoft, which is the company that developed Tomograph, they also have a software called ComView for Wi-Fi, which does packet capture analysis, a little bit more advanced than Wireshark, that you can also get. Yeah, I think it's only Windows though.
Yeah, I think that might only be Windows. I think the Tomograph site survey just got ported to Mac. And the reason why we use Mac is because of all the tools available to us, and also the access you get to the wireless card, the wireless adapter on the Mac. You're able to use tools like AirTool, and you're able to use basically tie that into Wireshark and get everything you need to start analyzing. Whereas on Windows, you most likely need some sort of USB adapter in order to capture some of those packets, right? And so some of the tools, I think, Francois, you're more familiar with the Windows tools. So you have Wireshark. You have Wireshark there for capturing. That's still free. You can connect your WLAN Pi if you have one. And if you don't have a WLAN Pi, I think that's one affordable tool. It's inexpensive compared to the other enterprise type tools that are out there. There's also MetaGeek, which has Insider for network scanning, and then they have Channelizer, and they're coming out with a lot more tools that are updated and some brand new tools for Wi-Fi analysis. Then there's the NetSH commands, and I think that's going to be useful to know, which gives you access to the wireless on. Is it wireless from the device level side, Francois?
Yeah, it's they allow you to see some stats from the Wi-Fi NIC. So if you want to see, what type of data rate your NIC is connected at, and this type of information, what type of Wi-Fi network are detected by your NIC, you can use those commands to get an idea.
So you can tell I don't use Windows that often when it comes to looking at Wi-Fi. And then also there's OmniPeak. So when I did have Windows, I used OmniPeak a lot for wireless, and I thought that was a really advanced tool. It's like Wireshark on steroids. It's not free, and I'm not sure how much it costs nowadays, but that was actually a very useful tool.
Yeah, and then you also have WinFi. Sorry.
Oh yeah, there's also WinFi. We did an interview with the creator of WinFi a number of episodes back, so we'll link out to that. That's actually a really nice network scanner for Windows, and I think it was very needed in the Windows space. I was never able to find a good Wi-Fi scanner from the Windows Play Store or Windows Store, and I think you can download this application directly from his website. There's a light version, and I think there's a professional version, and we were also able to meet him at WLPC Prague, which was really cool.
Yeah, so we'll put the link so you guys can download that for yourself as well. Okay, so we talked about the why, the purpose of having a lab. We talked about the what, the type of equipment and software you need. Now let's talk about the how. So what are you supposed to do in your lab? How are you supposed to configure your lab? I think a lab is a place to experiment. So things are going to get messy. I think it's normal, right?
Yeah. In my lab, it's very messy.
In your lab, it's very messy, which is the intent of it, right? So it's okay. But I think at least what have worked for me in order to save time is I try to keep the configuration as simple as possible as I can most of the time. And then when I'm ready to break things, I just save my configuration and then I do my work and then I go back to the initial state, which is, a state with a very simple set of configurations. And I found that that's going to save me a lot of time. I used to get very frustrated spending hours on my lab because, some stupid thing is not working and, and I need to, I spend time trying to figure out what's not working.
Yeah.
So I tend to do it like that now. So I can easily go back to a state where I know the lab is simple and stable.
Yeah, and I think there's some level of consistency that should be on your network, right? So maybe the infrastructure should be configured very similarly for different lab setups. In my lab, I have a carved out network just for lab space and lab testing. So I have a few networks, a few VLANs that I use that's specifically just for my lab. And I actually have it firewalled off so it doesn't affect anything from my home network. So that way my wife and my kids can operate whatever devices are connected to the Wi-Fi network there. So I have it separated out physically, Wi-Fi for the home and then all my different Wi-Fi APs for the lab environment.
That's an amazing tip. Keep your lab separated from your home Wi-Fi network, please. Yeah, it's going to save you a lot of trouble.
It's going to save you some calls.
Save you some calls. Yeah, so I actually do that as well. I used to have 2 different internet connections for that purpose.
Oh, wow. 2 different internet connections in the home. That's
yes.
Advanced right there.
Yeah, that's advanced. I don't have that. I don't have that anymore.
Okay.
But I used to have, one internet connection just for my lab and my stuff, and another one for the house. The one for the house I never touched. Right, so it's like the network in the house is always up and Netflix is always working, type of thing. And then for my lab, I would just break things, and then work on that myself. Now, what I do is I do it like you. I have a firewall, and then I have my home network in a specific subnet that I never touch, and then all the rest is on other subnets that I play with.
Okay, so very similar to mine, and it sounds like you and I follow almost a very similar process. And the only thing I don't do that you probably do is work on the documentation side.
Yeah, I like that a lot, but it's just I don't know. It comes from how I learned stuff, I guess.
Yeah,
we used to do a lot of that when I was back in university in France. Everything had to be documented, so. Can I, carry that along with me?
Very nice. So you do a network diagram for how your lab is set up, and then you change it up based on the hardware you're using.
Yeah. So I have. So what I did is I created a diagram of the simple network diagram of my lab. It's nothing crazy. It's just the different VLAN that I need. So I have like one VLAN for server related objects. I have one VLAN for my Wi-Fi networks, my SSIDs. I have one other network for my wired equipment, type of thing. So it's not very complex, but I have that written down. And then every time I add an equipment, I will just add it on my diagram. Is it a static IP or is it DHCP? I would just document those informations, and I also document my my switch where I connect things, because it tends to get messy on that part as well. You disconnect stuff, and then at one point you don't know what this cable is going to, and
yeah.
So So I try to document that as well. It helps me because the way my lab is set up is I have my equipment downstairs, right underneath my office, and then I have some cable that goes up into my office, and then I have a second switch in my office as well. So I need to know exactly what equipment is downstairs, what equipment is in my office, and what ports I have available in my office, on which VLAN and stuff like that. So I like to have that documented, so I know that when I connect an equipment to a port, I'm supposed to know which IP I'm getting from it.
Yeah, and I like to use a lot of the port descriptions configured on the switch, so that way I know, okay, this port is specifically going to be used by this AP or controller, and that's why that VLAN is configured on there. So you want to configure your equipment where it's going to make sense with how you're going to test your lab, and then also document that process, because if it's going to be a while before you maybe play with your equipment again, before you start reconfiguring it, sometimes you want that documented, because then you look at it and you go, why is it configured that way, and why did I do that? What was I doing yesterday that's different today? So sometimes you want to write that in a document. I have a specific document where I list out some of the lab configuration that I'm working on, if it's very specific to a platform. And then once you have something that's working, or also just on your lab network in general, you want to back up that any of the configurations you have, so that way if something breaks or you need to start fresh, you have a known good working configuration, and you could just re-upload that onto your equipment and just get started all over again, rather than having to reconfigure it all from scratch. And you don't necessarily have to waste time trying to get to that state again where you can start testing. So I think having backup configurations of all your equipment could be very beneficial for you. But you could also script this out and use some tools that are available to automatically grab those configurations, or set up a script to automatically save those configurations to some file destination on a file server that you have on your network, or just to your laptop, for example. That could be useful for you as well. And if you're using iTerm, some of the things that I do with iTerm is I save my output, anything that gets outputted on my terminal screen. It automatically writes to a file. So sometimes I use that file to go back and go, what was I configuring yesterday, for example, around 8 o'clock, and I could see that file and see all the commands that I placed into iTerm.
Yeah, that's a very good tip. And as well, what I do as well is I keep bookmarks of all the web interface of all the equipment I have in my lab. So I know I don't need to find all the IP address again, go back to my diagram when I quickly want to connect to, my switch interface or firewall, whatever. I just go to my bookmark, and then I have, a bookmark for my firewall, for my switch, for my controller, and I can just quickly connect to them. And also we didn't talk about that, but I also have a VPN set up, so I can connect to my lab. Even if I'm remote, I can connect via my VPN and then have access to all the equipment as well.
Yeah, that could be useful if you're on site somewhere and you wanted to test something real quick, because there's going to be a lot of environments where there's change control. So maybe there's a feature you want to test out and you have that equipment in your home lab. You can remote in, try to configure something, see how that works, and then be able to be more confident in going, okay, here are the changes we're going to make, and this is how it's going to affect your network, and here's the expected change that we should see once we apply it.
All right. So Let's
one
talk
thing,
about
one thing I didn't want to mention is if you are continually building out equipment, it might be wise to learn how to script the installation. So if you're going to install like the 9800, for example, maybe learn how to just script it out and do the installation for you and speed that up. So that way you're not wasting time doing installs every single time, especially with trial equipment. All right. So, Francois, you wanted to jump into what we have in our lab, our specific lab setup?
Yeah, I thought it would be a fun way to end the equipment, just end the podcast, the episode, just to tell you guys what we have in our lab. And then, yeah, so you can get an idea of, how we made it evolve over time.
Okay.
So on my end, I have a firewall, a VPN, gateway, router, all in one box, I guess. It's a 40net 40gate 60E. And you also have like a Leo switch in it, so I could connect PoE, I could connect access points if I want to. I don't use it for that purposes, but I could as well if I wanted to. And then I have a couple of switch. I have a Unify Ubiquiti 16-port switch with PoE plus ports, 1 gig ports. And then I have, so that's what I have downstairs. And then I have upstairs in my office, I have a Cisco fanless switch 12 port that I can also use to connect some things. And I have like a trunk connection between those two switches, so I can have all my VLANs upstairs as well. And I also have a couple of dumb Netgear switches. If I need more ports, or if I need to power an AP, like I told you earlier, I have this PoE Plus switch that I use sometimes to power APs. So that's for the switches. For the controllers, I have a Cisco 2504. I have a Cisco Catalyst 9800 as a VM, and I have Aruba 7008. So I like to have a Cisco, one Aruba, so I can test, different features. And if a customer calls me and like, hey, is it possible to do this? I can just go in my lab and then test it out. Yes, no. And then because I have it in my lab, I can take screenshots, I can take videos, and I can show them, this is possible, this is not possible, these are the options you have, and so on. And we can start discussion from there.
And those are the two vendors you work with primarily, right?
Yeah, most of the time. And then the other vendors, they're like cloud-based, right? So if it's Mist, Meraki, and so on, so I don't need a physical controller with me. But yeah, these are the two vendors I work with the most.
Okay.
So that's why I wanted to have I didn't purchase purchase those controllers from day one. But I think I got the 2504 first, and then I used to have an older Aruba controller, 650, I think. And then this year changed it to 7008. I'm actually sharing that with Cedric in France. So that's also something you can do to share to bring the cost down. You can share equipment with other people and share the cost.
Awesome.
So that's for the controllers and access points. I have multiple access points from different vendors. I don't have all of them connected all the time. I just kind of play with them. What?
You don't have 16 SSIDs running in your house?
On each AP? On each frequency band? Yeah. But yeah, I have AeroHive, Aruba, Cisco, Mist, Ingenious, Ubiquiti, Fortinet. The one I use right now, right now I have nothing because my office is getting renovated. But before, I used to have the Wi-Fi 6 AP from Ingenious in my office, and the Aruba AP in my office as well, up and running. So when my office is renovated, I want to have the Mist set up. In my office, I actually have the Wi-Fi 6 one. But yeah, the AP I have. Most of the time, I keep them in my office. I just like to have them in my office, but I could have them downstairs. Doesn't matter for what I do. I'm close enough to my downstairs lab to be able to pick up the signal.
Okay.
Then I have a couple of servers. I have a NAS from Synology that I keep all my files on. I used to use it as a VPN gateway, but now I use the FortiGate for that. I have an Intel NUC with Ubuntu that I use for some of the projects I do as well. And then other interesting equipment I have WLAN Pi. I have an Apple TV. I used to, try to figure out, how that works on the Wi-Fi network. I have Alexa speaker that I use for all my office home automation stuff, and I can study that as well. I have a Chromecast. I have a Jetson Nano that I use for packet capture, Wi-Fi 6 packet capture, and I have a NetBeast sensor.
Look at you, enterprise at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
My lab is very similar to yours. I currently also have a FortiGate firewall running as my main firewall, but I sometimes swap that out with a Meraki MX because I do also have a full stack Meraki network. So that means I also have the Meraki switch. It's an 8-port switch. That's my main switch where I keep my internet, which is in my living room, and that's where the FortiGate connects to. I have another lab in the garage, which I use power line or power inline to connect the two, because I don't have copper going from my living room to the garage. So I somehow have to connect that lab. Although it's not the most perfect connection, I get about 20 to 50 megs between the two using that power line adapter, which is it looks like a power brick that you just plug in, but it has an Ethernet port, and somehow all those two endpoints will connect each other. And then I also have a Cisco 3560 CG switch. I also have a 12-port switch, so those are those mini switches from Cisco. I also have a Meraki 8-port and 24-port switch for testing different Meraki things. I do have a lot of Meraki clients. And then when it comes to controllers, I have one 2504, one 3504, and a 9800 CL, which is a VM. And so what's interesting with having that in your lab is being able to use all three somehow in your lab and test transitions and test HA, for example. A lot of different scenarios you could run there. And then when it comes to access points, I've got so many. I got a bin of access points with old Cisco, APs, Mojo. I've got Aruba, Ingenious, 40AP, Mist, Cisco, OpenMesh, all for different scenario testing, different feature comparisons. And then when it comes to servers, I also have an Intel NUC, which we could probably list out how to build an Intel NUC for lab purposes. But on there, I use FreeRadius. I've got some Ubuntu servers. I also have my Cisco 9800 running on there. And then it still has availability to run any other servers for whatever reason. Like I had a Cisco Prime lab running for a while because there was one project where I had to upgrade Prime, so I was trying to test that out. And then I also have a Synology NAS where I just keep a lot of my files and a lot of my backups there, along with the documentation. And then when it comes to other wireless tools, I have a WLAN Pi. I have one of those Amazon Dots, which hopefully one day I can program Alexa to do something on my wireless network. I've used the Jetson Nano heavily for Wi-Fi 6 testing. So looking at the APs that I have, I do have a couple of Wi-Fi 6 APs. And then also a NetBees sensor, which we were testing with one of the episodes previously back, the sponsored episode with NetBees.
Yeah, and we have to, and as a full disclosure, we have to say that some of the equipment we got through the podcast as well. Vendors have sent us some equipment like the FortiGate stuff, the firewall, the API. I got that from the podcast. We got the Ubiquiti gear through the podcast, the NetBeast sensor, and the Ingenious APs as well.
Yeah, the Ubiquiti stuff was from way long ago.
Yeah,
to test out features, and right now we're testing out the Ingenious APs. So hopefully we look forward to coming out with an episode just comparing some of the other vendors, not just the Cisco's and Arubas, but who else is making good wireless products out there. So we're gonna have another episode on maybe like small business Wi-Fi, or comparing some of the lower cost APs to the big guys. And this is what we do in our lab, is just to test things out, and also to come out with new episodes as well, because in order to talk about it, we need to try to implement it and see how a vendor does it, right? So I think it's important to have a lab. In our scenario, we use it in combination of doing episodes for the podcast and also doing things for our clients. So our lab has multi-purposes here.
And something that we should mention is you don't have to leave all the equipment on all the time. If you want to save some energy and be green, right? Help the planet. Some of the stuff you can turn it off when you don't use them.
Yeah, and I have a little power adapter that has wireless capability. So if I'm not at home and I forget to turn things off, or I need to turn something on, I can remotely power on an individual outlet on that thing, so that way I can just spin up a lab real quick, but not have it running 24/7.
That's a good tip. All right, I think that was pretty good. We talked about a lot of things. Hopefully it's a valuable information for you guys. As an opening question, I would ask you, what is the most interesting piece of equipment you have in your lab? So if you want to share that with us, go on Twitter at Clear2Send and tell us, the most interesting piece of equipment you have in your lab.
Yeah, let us know in the comments of the show notes as well. Clear2Send.net/202. We'll also list out our equipment on the show notes page and other resources that you could use to build your own lab.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Roel, for taking the time to record this episode with me.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure. And then, like you said, we'll put all the links in the show notes. We'll come up with also 7 tips on how to build and operate your perfect wireless lab, so you guys can get that as well on your end and share with friends. All right, thank you guys for listening. The show notes will be at Clear2Send.net/202, and have a good week. We'll talk to you guys next week. Bye bye.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.